Yeah. Okay, so we are going to go through forms, and then you're going to learn how to save cookies, even though Google is phasing out cookies. The other browsers haven't announced that they are. So I'm going to show you how cookies work. If all of the browsers phase them out, then people will probably just use local storage, which is part of HTML5. We cover that in CIT 190. I'm also going to show you how to use user sessions. And user sessions are just a way to share data during an internet session. Because we are using forms, I did include some links to Bootstrap for form information. So you guys can kind of review that, because you are going to need to format your forms using Bootstrap. So forms utilize globals, and we talked about global variables a couple weeks ago. And we are going to just kind of review globals and then talk about how forms handle them. So, you know, global variables all go into a little global array. And you can basically access the values by subscripting in with the variable name. And we have a server that also is kind of like a global, and you can subscript into that and get information basically about the server that is hosting your website. And then we get into additional globals. Request, post, and get pretty much deal with forms. So request contains everything for get, everything for post, and everything for cookie. Okay, so it contains, it's like a super array of all of the globals. We are going to be using more post and get. So when you submit a form, you can either use a method equal to post or a method equal to get. So whatever method you use, it takes the name variable and it makes that the key. And then it takes the value that they put in the form and associates that with the key. Okay? And so if the method was equal to get, it goes into the get global. And if the method was post, it goes into the post global. So when you're working with forms, depending on how you submit them, your data is going to go into either post or get. Does that make sense? And really, for most forms, you're going to use post, because the data is hidden when you use post. When you use get, the data shows up on the URL. So an example of get would be if you go to any of the search engines and you do a search and you look up on the address bar, you can see it up there. That's what get does. Other types of globals are files, and this would be content that is uploaded. We have an environment global. If you've ever used Unix or Linux, there are environment variables on the server, and that is what this global stores. Then we have a cookie and a session global, and we're going to be using those today. So you'll be able to see how they work. And after today, if you are curious and you want to know more about the globals, I did include a link to the PHP manual. So let's see, we talked about how forms are submitted. We've talked about the get and post globals. And so what we're going to do is talk a little bit about how to retrieve the data. So automatically when you submit, the data is going to go into this global. You don't really have to do anything special because PHP automatically does this for you. And it is using the name attribute. Quite often in your forms, you'll have ID and name set to the same thing. JavaScript and client-side validation tend to use ID. Server-side validation tend to use name. Okay, so here is a little example of a form. And we have Bootstrap mixed in here too, because you can see we have class of container. You can see method is post. You can see our action is going to submit to a PHP script that's going to process the form. And then you can see we have labels and we've got input elements. Okay. And for the various input elements, we have the name attributes. So when they enter the data into the input element and they submit, the data is associated with the name attribute. And as far as what it gets submitted to, it just gets submitted to this little script here. And you can see that it's looking in the post global and it's grabbing name. Okay, so whatever they submitted for name gets retrieved and displayed there. And then it's looking at the post global, subscripting in with email. So whatever they entered for email gets displayed there. And if you guys want to try this and run it live, you can. So we'll just key in a fake name. And let's see. Okay, so it's retrieving Bugs Bunny from post and the email. Any questions about how that works? So get works a little bit different. The only difference between post and get is basically the data displays up in the URL. Okay, that is the primary difference. When you are subscripting in, you have to use the get global instead of the post, but it's still using the name attribute. Okay, so whether you use get or post just depends on if the data needs to be private or not. Yeah. Yeah, and if you have a really long form, get has a limit as far as how many characters it can handle because it's putting it up in the URL, and post doesn't have that limit. As far as data validation goes, a lot of validation is handled in the client side. It's kind of the job of the client side to do the validation. What the server side typically does is make sure the data is sanitized and clean before it updates the database. But I am going to show you how to do some validating of data on the server side as well. So having taken the 190 and this class, you'll know how to do it on both sides. Data validation functions. So in PHP, there's an empty function, and it basically checks to see if there's something there or not. Okay, so if something was required and you check and it tests empty, then you would want to display an error message. Okay, so here's a little example. If we made name required and said they had to fill it in, and we send it to empty. And you'll see that we're grabbing it right from the post global and sending it to empty. If that tests true, that means there's nothing there. And we fill in an error variable that we will be displaying. Okay. Otherwise, we'll take the name that they filled in and we store it in a variable. PHP also does regular expressions and it checks for patterns. And so this is a pattern regular expression match. That's what it's trying to do. So PREG is short for pattern regular expression. Most languages do have some type of regular expression validation. And so what I did was, I do have a link to the full manual section, but I did include like a little reference here, just so you can see the different patterns that you can check for. And it's been my experience with regular expressions that pretty much anything you wanted to validate with a regular expression has been done before, and you can do a search and you can find a string that'll work. So you don't really have to reinvent the wheel with this. But just in case you wanted to do your own, I did include this information. So if you wanted to ensure that an entry contained letters or white spaces, this would be the regular expression that you would use. Okay, this little pattern here. Okay, so here we've got name, and here we have a pattern. And then here we're sending pattern regular expression match, the pattern and the name. And we're seeing, or we're making sure that it doesn't equal a 1. 1 means that it's okay. So if it returns anything besides 1, then there's something that they entered that was not allowed. Okay, and then we would want to display an error. Validating a URL. I'm just going to, this explains, kind of breaks down the regular expression, and I'm going to let you guys read through that. Because this is validating a URL, and it is rather lengthy, but you can see at the beginning, we're looking for HTTPS, we're looking for FTP, and it's looking for www, FTP, all sorts of different variations here, but it is validating the URL. Okay, and then here is how it's being used. Okay, so here we're setting the pattern. We're sending the pattern, and in this case, the website variable. And if it doesn't equal a 1, then there's a problem. Now, in addition to using regular expressions, there is a function called filter var. And there's basically, they've set up validating email, validating IP addresses. I believe validating URLs is there as well. And so if we wanted to validate email using this function, we can. Okay? If you wanted to validate IPs, you can. You just need to know the commands to enter. So this little example shows how you would use filter var to validate email. So the function is filter var. We are sending it the email variable. And this is what we want it to do. We want the filter to validate the email. Now, could you validate the email with a regular expression? Yes. But in my opinion, anytime you can use a function, I would prefer to use a function, because then if anything in email land changes and things need to be adjusted, then they adjust it and you don't have to worry about it. Okay, it just makes your life a little easier. So if not filter var email, validate email, then that means it's an invalid format. Okay, so that's basically how that reads. So if it's not a valid email address, display the message. Here it is for URL validation. So you saw the website validation in the previous example with the pattern. To me, this is a little bit cleaner than the big long string. Okay. I guess it kind of comes down to personal preference. Like some people want to control everything within their program, so they probably would like the pattern, right? Because you're writing that and it's under your control. For me, this kind of thing, I don't mind having a function do that, just because if things change, they have to update it, makes my life easier. Okay, so you can use this for validating URLs as well. PHP does come with a special character function. So it will convert these special characters into their HTML equivalents. So those are things like less than signs, greater than signs, apostrophes, any kind of special character gets converted into HTML. You will notice this when we are processing forms that have validation. We will do something like this. HTML special characters, server, PHP self. What that does is it converts everything into the HTML special characters, and it kind of reloads the page, so if there's errors, we can display the errors. The trim function we talked about a couple weeks ago, it's a text function or a string function, gets rid of unnecessary characters. Strip slashes removes backslashes from your input data. The special characters, the trim, strip slashes, this is all part of cleaning your data to make sure that you don't have a hacker injecting anything. Quite often, these functions are put into a separate function that you call, and you send your data to this function, and you run through all of them, and it comes back and it's clean. Okay, so here I've got a little function called test input. I'm pulling in my data, and you can see I'm trimming it, storing data, stripping the slashes, storing it, running it through HTML special characters, storing it, and then I'm returning it. Okay, and you'll also notice that here's my post. So here I'm pulling it from the global array, and I'm pulling it from the array and sending it to test input. Okay, then it comes, runs through here, it cleans everything, and then it stores it. Okay, so I'm doing that for every single thing that was in my form. Okay, making sure that it's clean data before I store it. And the reason we're so careful about this on server side is because I would say 99.9% of the time, you're going to be updating a database with the data. So it has to be clean. So here is that validation in the form tag. Method is post. Here's our action, where we are running it through special characters, and it's basically posting to itself. And that allows us to display error messages. And then this little example is the web page with all of the error handling. So you can see up at the top of the PHP that we've got the error variables, and I'm setting those to blank. And then I've got my regular variables that I'm also setting to blank. Okay, and then we've got, it's checking to see if the form has been submitted. So the server global, when we go in with request method, it's either going to be post or get. Okay, if it's post or get, that means they submitted the form. If they submitted the form, that means we have to check everything. So we're checking name to see if it's empty. If it is, we put something in the error message. Then we're grabbing the name, if the name is there, sending it through test input to clean everything, and then we're storing it. Then we've got the pattern that we're going to check. We send it through the pattern regular expression. We check it. If there's a problem, we fill in the error message. Okay. Then we are checking email, seeing if it's empty. And then we're using filter validate email to check that one. Then we basically do the same thing with the website. We always check to see if it's empty. If it's not empty, then we basically check it for everything else. Same with comment, same with gender. And then this is what does the self-post. So at this point, we would have error messages, right? We're filling in gender error, or we're filling in a website error, or we're filling in a name error. And so where do those display? In the body of the form, below the different input elements, you're going to have something like this, where you have span class equal text danger is bootstrap red. Okay. And then you'll have your closing span, and in between you have the PHP that displays the name error. So that's going to be blank unless there's a problem. Okay, it's our validation that fills that in. Okay, and so option 1 is the way you guys are going to be doing error handling. Option 2 does not use Bootstrap. So option 2, you'd have to create your own error class. And then you'd still use a span tag, but instead of using Bootstrap's error class, you have to use your own. Okay, and typically errors are displayed in red. Okay, so here is kind of a more full example here. You will notice that we have our input, and I don't know if you guys have ever gone to a website and filled in the form, submitted it, and there's an error, and it wipes out everything you keyed in. That drives me insane. Okay, so the way to prevent that is where you have the value attribute, use PHP and pull in the value. So this, you know, assuming that name wasn't the problem, right? This will grab the name that you entered. This is going to grab the email you entered. This is going to grab the website you entered. So you don't have to re-enter everything. Okay, and I do want you guys to do your forms like that. Okay, so you'll notice in all of them that we've got the PHP echo followed by the variable so that that data shows up and they don't have to re-enter it. And then below the different areas, you'll notice we have the span class for the error if there is an error. If you have option buttons, this is how you would set it up. And let's see. So we have radio buttons. With these, only one of them can be turned on. So the input type is radio. And then you have a different value for each of the buttons. And then basically what you have to do is see if the gender variable is set. Okay? If it is set and it is equal to female, then this is the one that was selected, so you have to turn it on. Echo checked turns it on. If it was set and the gender is male, then this is the one that needs to be turned on. Nowadays, in forms that ask for gender, you will also see other and quite often prefer not to disclose. So there's quite often 4 options. Okay, and so that's what I included here. So I included the other, and then for prefer not to disclose, I just said no, not doing it. Okay, so it's going to check and then see which one is turned on and display it as checked. And this is the code, the PHP code that would be at the top that would be processed for that. For checkboxes, so in a form, if you're doing a checkbox, more than one of them can be turned on. Okay, with the radio buttons, only one, but checkboxes, any number of them can be turned on. So up in your PHP, you have to do something like this. It ends up storing things in an array. So when you set up the name for a checkbox, it has to be an array because multiple things can be turned on. Okay? And then when you process, you use for each. So it goes through every item in the array. And then you check the different values. And if the value is equal, then you're going to set different variables to true. And that's what you check up here. So if USA select, so if that was true, then it's checked. If Canada select, if that's true, then it's checked. Okay, so they all go in an array. You check each one to look at the value. So you can see each one of these has a different value. They have the same name attribute, but they have a different value. So we basically are subscripting in, and we're checking each value. We've created variables for each one, okay? And we just set them to true if it's turned on. Does that make sense? Hey, I'm going through this in detail because you guys are going to have to do this, okay? So I want to make sure you understand, okay? For a drop-down list, let's see. So we've got select, and the class is from Bootstrap here. The name associated this is interest. And then the first option is please select an interest area. And then after that, we get into their actual choices. So value of climbing, spelunk, skydiving, or surfing. Yeah, so basically here it's just checking to see which one they picked. And this is assuming they can only pick one. Okay, and then you can see below that we have the error message. Now, if you were going to allow more than one, then you've got to do something like this. You'd have to put them into an array. You'd have to create different variables to store if they were true. Okay? You'd have to set it up just like you did with checkboxes. So unless, I'm pretty sure I have you guys doing a drop-down list, but I'm not specifying that you have to do more than one. So you might want to keep it simple and just have them select one thing. And so I have this example. Okay, and all of this is formatted using Bootstrap. Okay, and then I've got required fields so they know which ones they have to pick. And let me shrink this so you can actually see the submit and reset buttons. And let's see. If you guys want to see the code for this, I did include a PDF with the code. Okay, so this has got everything. So this has got all of the Bootstrap stuff, plus it's got all of the PHP, everything for the forms, so you can kind of see it in its entirety. And I'm pretty sure you guys are not going to be able to copy and paste from this because I actually prevented that. And there's a very good reason, because I saw some of you smiling. You're thinking, oh, we can just copy. If you copy from a PDF and you create a PHP file, there are hidden characters and it'll blow up. You absolutely cannot do it. And it's what I end up having to do to debug it is take out all of your extra spaces, because that's where the hidden characters are located. So I'm pretty sure I don't allow you to copy. In fact, I'll try it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not going to let you. Yep. So it won't. That's what I copied for Zoom. Okay, so I'm not doing that to be mean. I'm actually doing that to help you guys out. I know, that mean, rotten teacher. I know. I know. I know. I mean, we do a lot with forms. So once you guys get your form done, you'll be able to copy and paste your own form for the different things we're going to be able to do. I know. Well, anyway, so the action in these forms is to self-post. So how do we get our code to a script that's going to process the code? So we've shown them the errors, they've fixed the errors, they're submitting, so there are no errors at this point, and we need to redirect them to go to the page that's going to process everything. And so what we have to do is we check to make sure all of the error variables are empty. So if all of the error variables are empty, then we use the header and change the location. So we basically send them to a different page. Okay, and that's how we get them to the script that's going to process everything. So this link takes you to that form that does the redirecting to the page. Okay, and this is the PDF for that file. And then I also included a couple ones from the book, which you guys can download and get the code from. For your assignment, it's going to be more similar to what I've done, okay, than what the book has. Do you guys have any questions?
So when we do something wrong and error message is created or moved into area,
Mm-hmm.
and then we correct it, was there somewhere that it turned erased it?
I think it should. Let me see. That's required. Other. No, it just is redirecting you. Yeah, I think you're thinking like MVC, where it's like you key it in and it goes away. It's not coded to do that. It would go away if, like, let's say I filled in a couple things that were required, but I still forgot one. then the other ones will go away when I submit it. But this one is here. Then when I fill this one in and submit it, it just goes to the next step. So in the assignment, you guys are going to have to do a form very similar to this one, okay, where you submit to a confirmation page, okay? And I am giving you all of the code for that. No, you can't. No, unfortunately, or actually, fortunately for you, because I am looking out for you guys, yeah, you don't get to copy and paste any of this, but at least you can see it. Okay. So, yeah. So you're going to do the first form on the assignment, and then you're going to make a copy of it and include cookies. Okay, so we're going to talk about cookies. So that first form that you do for the assignment is going to take you the most time, okay? And then it's just a matter of copying it and tweaking a couple things for cookies. You'll make another copy and tweak a couple things for session variables, okay? So basically what cookies do is they store information, typically from forms, on the user's computer. I don't know why people have had a fit about cookies. It's just your own information stored on your own computer, okay? But people have made, they've made such a big deal that it's kind of ridiculous. So anyway, I'm going to show you how to do cookies, even though they're being kind of phased out, at least on Google, and I don't know what the other browsers are going to do. So basically, for a cookie, you have to create the cookie, and it's done in name value pairs, okay? And you have to give it an expiration date, which is usually a date in the future. And then once you create it, you can retrieve that data using the name value pair. So to create a cookie, you have to use set cookie. You give it the name that you want to store the cookie under, you give it the value, you give it the expiration date. Everything else is optional, okay? So the path, this would be the server path to the cookie, the domain, secure. You don't have to do any of that, okay? So in this little example, the name is name. The value is my name. And you can see that I have set the time using the current time plus, what, 3,600 minutes or milliseconds. So it's a future time. Then my vice is chocolate, and I have set the time into the future. Okay, and then you can see that for the other values that I'm basically using the defaults. And so when this runs, it's just going to come back and say the cookies have been set. Okay, and then to retrieve a cookie, all you have to do is go into the cookie global with the names that you used. So I use name and vice. So I have to subscript in with name, subscript in with vice to get those values. Okay, so you can see that's what I'm doing here. Now the other way to set a cookie, and this is more typically how it's done, is you have a little form that people fill out. Okay, and so in this form, I have the name attribute set to name, and then I have the second input element with the name attribute set to vice. Okay, and then they submit it. Okay, and so then I go and grab what they posted for name, I grab what they posted for vice, and I store them, and then I set the cookies. So I'm still setting them using name and vice, but now I'm actually using the values from the form, and I've set them using a time in the future. Okay, this script would be used to access either one, because as far as your computer is concerned, they're stored the same way. Now, in addition to subscripting into the cookie global, you can go into the server or the environment, but using these methods does not let you select the name that you want to retrieve. So I think they're kind of useless because you can't pick which one you want to see. Okay, and then quite often how this works when you revisit a site that has cookies, they'll check to see if the cookie is set. Okay, so they'll check to see if name has been set. And if it has, they'll welcome you back by name. Otherwise, you might get a generic message. Okay, and then they're checking to see if the device has been set. And here, if it has, they say something about it. Otherwise, you get a generic message. To remove the cookies, instead of setting the time into the future, you set the time into the past. So if you subtract 60, it is now the past, and that deletes the cookie. So basically, you do another set cookie, with the negative time. So time minus 60 is in the past, that deletes it. So I have examples. So the first one basically just sets the cookie. This is the one where you don't really get to interact with it. And then if we retrieve it, this is what it says. And then the second one you guys can do because you can interact with it. Bugs Bunny. And then we'll retrieve his. And then we'll delete. Okay, so the cookies have been deleted. And then we'll try retrieving them. So now they're all gone. So as far as adding those to your forms, here is the simple form. It looks the same as before, but now there's cookies. Okay, and then here is the PDF. And if you look through here, I'm not storing everything in a cookie. I'm just doing the name and the email, which is what I'm using in my confirmation. Okay, and then in the confirmation, I did include a PDF of that as well, so you guys could see the code. Because server side, you don't get to see when it runs. So now, what it's doing, instead of looking at post and grabbing from post, it's grabbing from cookie. Okay, so you guys are going to have the first form where it's using post. Then you're going to have the second form with the second confirmation. And in the confirmation, it's going to look at cookie instead of post. Any questions so far? Okay, so we are moving on to our session variables. So what session variables do during your internet session is they allow you to store data, and then you can share it within different pages at the domain. So this domain is lisaballback.com. If I use this session variable, I can share it with other pages on that domain. But the minute I exit out of the browser, the session variables are gone. Okay, and basically, this kind of talks about what goes on behind the scenes, where it's got a unique identifier for that particular session. And then it checks that unique identifier. But what you guys really need to remember, probably the most important thing, at the very top of the file. Okay, so if you have a file with the doc type here, it has to be above that. You need to have session start if you are going to use session variables, and it has to be the very first thing in the file. If you forget that, it's not going to work. Okay. This little example is a counter. And so if we go in here, you can see if the counter is set, we're adding 1. If it's not set, it starts at 1. Okay, and then down here, it's just going to display what the count is. So here is the page, right? So it starts at 1, and every time I reload it, 1 gets added. So it's 15 now. And if I come back over here and I visit that page again, now it's 16. Okay, because this is one internet session. Now, if I was to exit out of here, then it would be gone. Okay, so it's only persists during your current session. Typically, in the form you guys are going to be creating, this is what you have at the top. Okay, just a little session start. Okay, and then you do your regular processing. And so you're going to take whatever got posted, run it through the sanitizing, test input, store it as name. And then if that is something that you want to share, you store it in the session global, and you have to give it a key. This is an associative array. So I'm storing it under name. And then I do the same thing for email, because those are the two things that I am accessing in my confirmation screen. So I've got the email here for the key, and I'm storing email. Okay, that's the only change that is made to the main form. I have to do this at the top, and then I have to store the data that I want to use for the session variables. Then the confirmation, I have to retrieve from the session variable. So that means at the very top, I have to include session start. Okay, then I can access any of the session variables by subscripting into that session global. So I did include the PDF for the full example, but the only thing that's different from all of the examples we've looked at is the code that I boldface. Is this, and this. That's the only thing that's different. Okay, and here on the confirmation, what's different is this. And then instead of going into post, you're going into session here. You're checking to see if it's set, and you're displaying it. Does that make sense? So destroying session variables, if you exit out of the browser, they are destroyed. If you want to do it through code, you can use unset, or you can use session destroy. Okay, either one. Unset lets you get rid of one. Session destroy is going to get rid of all of them. Okay, and then I did include several different examples from the textbook. And the code for all of the textbook examples you can download from Moodle. You guys have any questions?